Comics. I'm Joe Getcho, and this is SpideyJoe's One Shots. Today I'll be covering issue number 101 of The Amazing Spider-Man from October 1971, which was the first appearance of a monster called
Morbius, the Living Vampire.
If you haven't already, and you really should, go and listen to our podcast episode on Morbius Old Wounds, where we cover issues number 1 through 5 from the Morbius solo run from 2020, and where we break down Morbius' origin and the Morbius movie from 2022, starring Jared Leto. As I mentioned in the after show, Morbius debuted following the updating of the comic book industry's self-censorship board, the Comics Code Authority, that lifted a ban on vampires and certain other supernatural characters in 1971, and that this issue is the first issue of Marvel Comics' flagship Spider-Man series written by someone other than character, co-creator, and editor-in-chief Stan Lee. The writer for this issue, Roy Thomas, wanted to bring Dracula himself in to fight Spidey, but Stan Lee said no, so they made up their own vampire, a vampire made from a science experiment instead of the more traditional Dracula-type vampire. But before we dive into issue 101, let's address the elephant in the room here. It's important to note at this point in time, Spider-Man, aka Peter Parker, had 6 arms. Yeah. So if we go back to the 100th anniversary issue of The Amazing Spider-Man, Stan Lee wrote that Peter wants to give up being Spider-Man forever, and he's been working on a project, apparently for years, that will make him normal once again. And then after quickly downing an experimental formula without absolutely any testing at all, because, you know, that's the way that we science in comic books, Spidey takes a walk down memory lane to discuss all the people in his life and has a bunch of 2-page battles with his main villains, basically everything you'd expect from a 100th anniversary issue written by Stan Lee, and concludes with Peter awakening to a cliffhanger that leaves him with 6 arms. What a way to end your writing streak and pass the story off to the next guy. So yeah, we pick up issue 101 with a 6-armed Spidey, and after a few phone conversations, Pete makes a call to Dr. Kurt Connors, aka the Lizard, to have a one-on-one chat now that Spidey has joined the Oops, I Turned Myself Into a Monster Club. While Spidey is busy trying to figure out how to web-sling with the weight and coordination of his added appendages, a certain Dr. Michael Morbius was found adrift in the middle of the ocean and has begun to suck the blood from the crewmates, leaving them all dead. He leaves the ship and finds land, and in case you have any lingering doubts as to which little villa by the sea Morbius has chosen for his sinister somnolence, he stumbles upon a certain man that has 6 arms. Not being picky, Morbius moves in to quench his thirst and gets the drop on Spidey, only to be interrupted by Dr. Kurt Connors, who then transforms into the Lizard. Yikes. That's kind of a sticky situation. Kind of sucks. And that's where issue number 101 ends, with the first appearance of Dr. Michael
Morbius, the Living Vampire.
Afterwards, in issue 102, Morbius escapes into the night and has a flashback scene where he recants the tale of setting sail with his friend and lab partner, Nikos, and the experiment with vampire bats that went horribly wrong and resulted in Nikos being the first casualty of the living vampire. He escapes into the water only to be rescued by the crew members he killed in the previous issue. Back in the present, the Lizard and Spider-Man subdue Morbius to take some of his blood for another experimental serum that, of course, won't be tested. Another fight breaks out, and then Morbius escapes into the river, presumed dead, while Spidey uses the serum to turn himself back into a radioactive spider-powered man with 2 arms instead of 6. But don't worry, true believers. Morbius comes back to collide with Spider-Man again in Marvel Team-Up issues 3 and 4, and then goes on to star in Vampire Tales, a black and white horror comics magazine published by Marvel's sister company, Curtis Magazines. He then gets his own feature in Marvel's bi-monthly adventure into Fear anthology series, beginning with issue number 20 and continuing through the final issue number 31 in December 1975. It's interesting to note that these issues were written by Mike Frederick and Steve Gerber, who had written the first Morbius solo story in Vampire Tales number 1, Doug Mensch and Bill Mantlo working with a wide variety of pencilers. As many side characters do at Marvel, Morbius was featured as a guest character in other books until being revived in the Morbius the Living Vampire series in 1992, which launched as part of the Rise of the Midnight Suns crossover in Marvel's supernatural/horror comics. This is really when he started to make the change from villain to hero. Then fast forward to 2007, where Brendan Cahill and Michael Gaydos from Alias take Morbius the Living Vampire through the deepest depths of terrifying addictions in a devastatingly fully painted horror tale. And C.B. Cebulski is joined by superstar penciler David Finch to present an untold tale of the king of vampires, Dracula, and his beautiful daughter Lilith in A Legion of Monsters, Morbius. This was followed by a Marvel Now reboot in 2013, featuring a 9-issue arc with Morbius as a good man who just needs a second chance. Then the 5-issue arc called Old Wounds from 2019, and an issue of Morbius Bond of Blood from 2021, written by Ralph Macchio, who's commonly associated with the Daredevil, Spider-Man, and the Ultimate Marvel Universe, but bears no relation to the actor who stars in the Karate Kid movies or the Cobra Kai series.
And that's a wrap.
Don't forget to check out our podcast, We Like Comics Because They Have No Bones, on anchor.fm/Boneless Comics Podcast, our website, bonelesscomicspodcast.wordpress.com, and our YouTube channel, tinyurl.com/Boneless Comics Podcast. Give us a like, subscribe to us, and send us comments with your thoughts on our podcast and on my Spidey Joe's one-shots. You can also find us on social media at Boneless Comics Podcast on Instagram and Facebook, and at Boneless Comics 1 on Twitter. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll get you later.
We like
Comics?